Welcome. You're about to watch a recording of the webinar, The Research Behind WWF's Plant-Based Consumer Guide. The webinar was held on the 23rd of September 2021. It was organized by Swedish Life Cycle Center and is part of a webinar series organized within the project Innovation Cluster for the Life Cycle Perspective. The project is funded by the Energy Agency and partners in Swedish Life Cycle Center. During this webinar, you will be listening to Hanna Karlsson Potter, who is a researcher at Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences.
Thank you very much. And yes, my name is Hanna, and I've been working with this project for some time. It's ended actually about a little bit more than a year ago when the guide for plant-based products were released. I think it was in September last year or the beginning of October. So it's been out there for a year now. And this is what I will talk about today. I will start with a short background to why WWF wanted this guide and the target group and so on for the guide and our role in the project. Then I will move on to the environmental assessment categories, how they were selected, the discussions around that, and how they are assessed in the guide. Then I will talk a bit about data collection, because in a guide like this, we have a challenge with getting data and finding it and on so many different products. So I will give you a background on what data we found and found feasible for using for this kind of large data set that we have. And then I will give some results, some examples. Everything is online, so you can also go and find the results in the guide. But I will give you some of more details into the results. And then I will finish with some reflections from me, but also from WWF. They were invited to talk today, but they couldn't come. But I've given me some slides that I will share with you on their how it has been with the guide for the first year. It's been available for consumers. Right, so we were contacted, we at the department, that is Elin Rös, my colleague, she was contacted by WWF. They wanted to develop a consumer guide for plant-based products. And they have a few guides, maybe you know from before, and that is the meat guide and the fish guide. And they wanted also now to have a guide for plant-based products. And Elin, my colleague, has been working with the meat guide, so that's why they contacted her. So I've been working with the guide for 1 year as a postdoc. So our role as researchers here was to, WWF came with the initiative and the ideas to start with and the funding for the project. It's part of this Vego i Världs class. It's a larger project with athletes that are eating more vegetarian food and showing that they can still perform while they eat more plant-based foods. And this guide is part of that bigger project. So they came with the initiative and they asked us for to help them to develop this guide. So it was a very close cooperation between us and the WWF, and our main responsibility in the development of the guide was to come with ideas and to help them and discuss how the guide should be built up, but also to supply data for the guide. And we also had a number of workshops with stakeholders from industry, like food suppliers, people that work with consumer organizations, and so on. I think it was 3 workshops along the development of the guide. So why did they want a consumer guide for plant-based products, and who's the target group for this guide? The aim of the guide is to contribute to sustainable food habits and consumption within the planetary boundaries by 2030. So as I said, they have a guide already on meat products and on fish, but they felt that, and the main message from the WWF has been to eat more plant-based from before, but now they wanted to go into that a little bit more and to eat better plant-based, to encourage that. So the aim is actually to encourage more plant-based diet, and to make it easier to make better choices within this category. They also wanted to fill the gaps, the knowledge gaps, and provide new information on plant-based products for sustainable production and consumption. There still are a lot of questions out there. Is soy-based products really good for the environment? And kind of give answers to some of the questions that many people that are interested in plant-based foods and food consumption have, and they wanted to give those consumers a little bit more information. But also to address, of course, the sustainability challenges with consumption of plant-based foods. There has been a lot of focus on the challenges with animal products, the environmental impact from animal products, and not so much maybe around the environmental challenges with plant-based food products. So that's one of the aims to address these. So the target group is clear. It's environmentally aware consumers. They don't think they can reach the everyday consumer. They want to have they want to reach the consumers that are especially interested in food consumption and environmental impact and plant-based foods, and also professionals that work within the food industry, and people that want to prepare more plant-based foods and make better choices within this category foods. So this is the message from WWF that they want to give with the guide. To eat within the planetary boundaries, to eat more and better plant-based foods. So one part, as I said from before, is to encourage a higher consumption of plant-based food. It's one of the aims, but also to make better choices within this category. So along with that, they have, I don't know if you're familiar with the WWF's other consumer guides, but they have like a traffic light system where they have green, yellow, and red in the meat guide, for example, and also in the fish guide. So they wanted the same kind of system in this guide, but they wanted the overall message to be like, there is a lot of green within this category. To fulfill the first goal here, to eat more plant-based products. And we also, I will come to that more later, discovered that if we're going to have some relation between the meat guide and this guide, then we need to have actually 2 green choices. Because otherwise it's really hard to show. Everything would be super green if we just went with the criteria for the meat guide, because usually plant-based products within these categories have much lower impact. So we decided that we'll have 2 green levels. So green star is the best environmental performers, and then we have green and yellow, and then they decided they will not have red in this guide. They still have orange, and the message with those different levels in the guide you can see here. Green star is the best option, and then the green is still eat that, it's fine, it's okay, it's green. Yellow is the message, eat sometimes, and orange means be careful. So these are the food groups and the functional unit of the guide. So first I wanted to say that we collected all the data. It was 1 year a postdoc, so we didn't do any new life cycle assessment studies or so. We collected data from already existing studies, and on many food products, I should say, there are some studies, but some really need more focus too, that we didn't find very much information on. But we decided we would base the guide on existing data, and we decided that the data should be gathered in a life cycle perspective of 1 kilogram. The functional unit is 1 kilogram ready to eat product in a store in Sweden, basically. So the system boundaries is up to retailer then, and not not going further than that. And the product groups that were included in the guide is what I called plant-based dairy. This was later removed. We have data on that, and it was included all along in our data collection, but the WWF decided not to include it because it was kind of difficult to communicate. I can come into it a little bit more later when we talk about environmental criteria. But for example, almond milk and almonds are in the guide. So if you have plant-based dairy, then almond milk might get a better score than almonds, because in almond milk, it's mainly water, only 2% or so almonds. So in the end, the environmental impact of almond milk is not as high as 1 kilogram of almonds, of course. So they found it hard to communicate. But it might be included in the future when we think about this a bit more and how to handle this category. Then we have, of course, protein foods, which is maybe what most people think about when it comes to environmental impact and plant-based foods. Beans and so on is in that category. Then we have nuts and seeds as one category. Carbohydrate sources. Here we include potatoes, all the cereals, root vegetables, for example. And then we have vegetables and mushrooms and fruit and berries. So we ended up with around 90 food products. And here you can, I don't expect you to read all this, it's just to get an idea of the different food products we have in the different categories. So in the protein sources, we both have beans and ready-made that you can buy, like soy nuggets and so on. Those would be included in this category. Yeah. Right. So to the selection of the let's see, we'll move this a bit. Yeah, to the selection of the environmental criteria. So looking at the meat guide, for example, they have biodiversity, climate impact, use of antibiotics, and some other animal welfare. And use of antibiotics and animal welfare is, of course, not relevant for a guide for plant-based products. So what we did is to kind of take a broad approach, and we looked at the planetary boundaries. What are the environmental categories there? And we also looked at the environmental impact assessment method recipe that maybe many of you are familiar with that work with life cycle assessment. And we took those environmental impact categories and we listed them, and we tried to see how relevant are these for the production of plant-based foods. How important do we think that these categories are for the users of the guide, or the consumers, or the food professionals, what we call them, were interested in these? Or do they think it's important to have knowledge? Because, for example, looking at global warming, we know that a lot of this production the climate impact is not as high as, for example, for animal products. So it's maybe not as relevant maybe for this category compared to meat production. But we think that the consumers are really interested in it. Then we tried to look at the availability of scientifically accepted methods to assess this category, this criteria. Availability of data for different food products. And then we had a total score. So we ended up picking 4 of these categories here. Climate impact, biodiversity impact, pesticide use, and water use. These are the environmental impact categories in the guide. And as we were working with the guide, I don't know if you recognize this picture, but it's from the Eat Lancet Commission, published in 2019. And it was published when we already started to gather data and we had started our work with the guide. And then we looked at that, of course, and what was new with this publication was that they presented planetary boundaries for the global food system. So then we asked ourselves, of course, when we look at the guide and we have those different levels and we communicate that green star is the best choice, can you stay within the planetary boundaries for the food system if you eat the best options of the guide? How can we somehow look into that and try to make sure that, well, not make sure, but somehow try to relate this guide to the planetary boundaries for the food system. So what we did was to look at these boundaries for climate impact, land use, and freshwater use that they were published in the Lancet report. And we calculated per capita boundaries for these categories. I don't know if you can see my arrow here. So we wanted in the end to have a criteria for each food product. But what we had was the global boundaries. But we wanted to have a criteria for the best level related to that, but per kilogram food in the store, right? So that's a challenge, and there is no right way to do this. This is how we did it, but I'm pretty sure you could do it several other ways that might also be good. So I'm happy to discuss it later during the questions, of course. So the environmental space for each category was divided over the different food products based on the environmental impact of different food groups in a sustainable diet. So after we had calculated the per capita boundaries, we were thinking about how much land does plant products usually use? And then we calculated that based on a sustainable diet, an example of sustainable diet. How much land would a protein source require in a sustainable diet? So then we calculated the boundary for 1 kilogram food by dividing the environmental space of each food group on the amount of food that we eat within each food group. So the boundaries are different for different food groups in the end. Yeah, this is a bit a bit complicated exercise, but we ended up with different boundaries for the different food groups. So we have a life cycle perspective of 1 kilogram edible product, including transport and packaging for all products. And different food groups get different boundaries depending on how much resources the production within this product group generally requires. So that we have different boundaries for the different food groups enables the visualization of the best product within each food product. So within each category, within each food group. So for example, if we would have the same boundaries on land use for all food products, then the cereals and the root vegetables that are very high yielding, they would always get green, and you would not be able to see what is the best carbohydrate source within this category. Everything would be green. So to have a lower boundary for that enables us so that we could see that or the consumers could see what is the best option within this category. It also highlights that products have different roles within the full diet. So it gives the option, for example, fruit and vegetables generally have a higher water use than carbohydrate sources. So that kind of leaves the room a little bit for fruit and vegetables, so that the boundary is a little bit higher for that group. You can still see the differences within the group, but it leaves a little bit of environmental space, let's call it that, for that group. There were a number of challenges. It's difficult to communicate this, how it was calculated, and why different food products would have different boundaries. difficult to communicate that to consumers. In the end, it's not really shown in the guide. I will give you some examples. So the guide is simplified, but yeah. It's also difficult to group some of the products. For example, we discussed a lot, where should the nuts be? Should they have their own group, or how are they consumed more like protein sources by vegetarians or people that eat more plant-based foods, or are they more snacks? In the end, we put them in together with the beans when we assess them, so they have the same boundaries as beans and ready-made protein sources. The same with root vegetables. Should they be with the vegetables, or should they be grouped with the carbohydrate sources? I mean, carrots maybe are consumed as vegetables, while other root vegetables are maybe more consumed as carbohydrate sources, or could be used as carbohydrate sources. We decided that we will put them together with the carbohydrate sources in the end. But this can, of course, be discussed and moved around. So to the environmental impact categories, we have climate impact assessment, where we assess the climate impact in carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram product in a store then in Sweden. The biodiversity impact assessment is built up by 3 different assessments. It's land use in square meters per kilogram product. And also it is, in addition to that, it is potential biodiversity impact from land use. It's called potential disappeared fraction, PDF, per kilogram product. So it's a method so that maybe some of you know about to calculate potential biodiversity impact from land use that is developed for life cycle assessment studies. And then in addition to that, we give credit to products with reliable certifications for management that in the field will give better biodiversity, field biodiversity, such as organic, for example. Yes, and water use impact was assessed as total water use. Water use can be assessed in different ways. For example, as blue water, green water, which is mainly the rainwater, and also there is gray water. So the total water use was one category of water use. And then we also, in addition to that, assessed blue water use, which is irrigation water. And in addition to that, it depends. I mean, if you use water in some parts of Sweden where it rains a lot, is maybe not as severe as using water in very dry regions of the world. So we used the impact on water scarcity from blue water use aware, the aware score per kilogram product as an indicator of how the blue water use is affecting local water availability. Pesticide use is a very interesting category. It's very hard to find data, but it's very consumers and also it's a very relevant category to have. Also WWF really wanted to have this category, of course. And it's very relevant for plant-based products, especially maybe fruit and vegetables, but also beans. So we looked at different options. In the end, we ended up assessing reliable certifications. Of course, I mean, if you're organic, if you don't use pesticides, then that's one thing, then it's green in the guide. We also ended up using legislation for pesticide use where EU legislation is assumed to be stricter than outside EU legislation. We also, in addition to that, used an indicator of active substance per hectare as indicator of high pesticide use. Now, using this indicator has many challenges. There is a lack of data, also on a European level. In Sweden, we have quite good data. So that's a challenge, but also one active substance can maybe not always be compared to another active substance when it comes to toxicity of using of using pesticides. So it's a challenge and it can really be improved. But this is what we decided to do that was feasible for this kind of guide with this many products, and also products from all over the world. So we have to be able to assess them even though they come from regions of the world with little data availability. Right, so a little bit about how we did. So we have 90 products. For every product, we had to select a number of countries. To assess land use, water use, and all of that, we have to know where is the product coming from. So we looked at, for some products, we have both domestic production in Sweden, but we also import. So then we looked at export statistics globally and also import statistics to see which countries that are exporting to Sweden. And then we used harvest statistics to calculate land use, and we calculate the losses to end up as 1 kilogram product in the store. And as I said, climate impact was assessed as CO2 equivalents per kilogram product, including transport and packaging. So we looked at previous studies, and if they did not include transport and packaging, we did that ourselves for the climate impact. So biodiversity, as I said, we looked at land use because land use is one of the main reasons. Land use for agriculture is one of the main drivers behind biodiversity loss globally. So that indicator was one thing. And then we used the indicator for biodiversity loss, as I mentioned, and here are the references for that if you're interested. And as I said, cropping systems that benefit biodiversity that could be verified through a reliable certification, such as organic, could be other certifications that's decided by WWF. And if you're certified, then you will automatically get 1 score better in the guide in the end. The data that we used was based on input statistics, where are the products coming from, and harvest statistics. Yes. Pesticide use. Certified organic, as I mentioned, is used as a guarantee that no pesticides are used. Legislation, where EU legislation is assumed to be more strict than other legislation. And dose per hectare, active substance per hectare, used as an indicator for high ecotox. And data, we're looking at the origin, certification, and pesticide use statistics when available, and that was mainly for Sweden, but also for some European countries. We had statistics on pesticide use. That is active substance and per hectare. And for water use, as I mentioned, total water use, blue water use, and AWARE was used. And we used data from the water footprint network and combined with import statistics and which countries are we supposed to look at. Yes, so to some of the results. As I mentioned, we have different boundaries for different food groups, and also this is available in the publication that I will show you later. So you don't have to go into detail into this, just to show that, for example, looking at the climate impact for protein sources, this is the boundary. So, for example, carbohydrate sources have a much lower boundary. And this is because the environmental space needed for producing carbohydrate sources is lower for climate impact, and yeah, for most other impacts actually. Right, so this is some selection of some results from the article that we published, and all of the different products are available in the appendix there if you want to look. Yes, so for example, some examples from the green, from the protein sources. You can see we have imported beans. We have beans from Sweden. We have organic beans and organic beans from Sweden. So for some products, we have many variants of the same product. While for others, for example, almonds, of course, we don't have Swedish almond production, and then we have almonds that are imported, which is an assessment of all of the different imported almonds, both conventional and organic. Yeah, and in the end, WWF only shows this final evaluation on the website. I'll show you that later. So that's what they decided to do. Yes, and these are some examples for fruit and berries, and for vegetables and mushrooms. Yes, and you can see, for example, conventional bananas get the orange evaluation in the guide, while organic bananas are getting green. Not green star, but green. Yes. Yes, you can ask me about this later, but yeah. So the guide is now an online tool where you can go in and search for different things. And this is what it looks like a little bit. And the slides I will show you from WWF also has some examples later. But here is, for example, bananas then. And here, when you come into the guide, you can see that, oh, there are bananas like green and eat sometimes and be careful evaluation. You get all of these. And this is also what the other guides look like a little bit when you get in, come to the guides. And then you can click on bananas, and then you get a text about bananas. They are grown here and there, and then you get the advice from WWF, where you preferably eat organic bananas, eat sometimes certified Rainforest Alliance, be careful with bananas that are not certified. Yep. And these are some examples from those different traffic lights here. For example, you see that lime and lemon gets green, but you can also have yellow evaluation. So you have to click on each product to kind of get the full picture of what the different evaluations they get. Right, so some reflections from me. I think it was super interesting work to work with this guide. I had a lot of fun, and we were discussing so many interesting things about consumer communication, and I learned a lot from them because they know much more about that than I do. It's WWF's guide, so they have the final decision and everything. So, for example, we discussed a lot how much that should be visible for the consumer when they come into the guide. Right now, you can go in there and you can see that bananas, conventional and organic bananas, get different traffic lights, but you cannot go and see what the different colors are for the different categories. So you cannot see it's because the impact of pesticide use, for example. You can maybe read it in the text, but you cannot see it. They also decided to not have a green star evaluation, so the best evaluation for water use, for example. Yes, which is maybe not consistent with the others, but yes, it's their guide and their advice in the end. They are using the information we gathered and the discussions we had, but in the end, it's their guide. Yes, so if you're interested in this more, there is a report about the data collection published in our SLU report series. It's called Environmental Impact of Plant-Based Foods, and that's mainly focusing on the data collection and listing all the studies, for example, that were used in the data collection. So if you want to know which studies that were available in 2019 for a lot of plant-based products that I could find, maybe you can find some other studies, you can go in there and look and see how we selected studies and how we made the evaluation of what study is relevant for the Swedish market and so on. And then we published a scientific paper more on the method for evaluating, selecting the environmental criteria and setting the boundaries for different food groups. Yes, so if you're more interested in that, you can go and read that paper. Thank you. And now you can ask me questions, but I also want to show some slides from WWF on their experience from the guide. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, it looks
Yeah.
good.
Okay, great, thanks. Right, so as I mentioned, they have already, when they came to us and asked for this guide, they had already the fish guide and the meat guide. And they wanted a guide on plant-based products. So this is what they look like. They're kind of similar, but the underlying data is different, especially when it comes to the fish guide and the other guides. The meat guide and the guide for plant-based products are connected in some ways, at least. I mean, the criteria for land use, for example, and climate impact is more or less the same. Although the guide for the plant-based product has a better than green level that the meat guide does not have. Yes, and this is all I already talked about this. Eat more plant-based and the right kind of make better choices within the category for plant-based. And this is the target group. I will not go through that again. This is what it looks like when you go into the guide. This is the evaluation for asparagus, spinach, and mushrooms. We have nice illustrations for all products. And then also they worked a lot with the text. So there is a little bit of how it's grown. This is for spinach, how it's grown, where it's coming from when we import it to Sweden. A little bit about losses in the system, and some curious about some of the products. Yes, and this is the advice for spinach, which is eat preferably spinach, organic spinach from Sweden. Also good to eat the green level or organic from Europe, and spinach from Sweden, and eat sometimes conventional spinach from Europe. So users so far of the guide has been around almost 52,000 unique visitors on the website from October when it was launched, 2020, until June 2021. And when it was launched, there were written about 150 articles about it, about the guide. So the main, publicity around the guide was around when it was launched. And this is Anna, their expert on food and environmental impact. So this is some information about how it was received. They've had around 6,000 interactions, and I asked her what is interaction. So that's when the guide has been shared, for example, or liked on social media. Around 6,000 clicks on social media, and this is also mainly around the launching of the guide in 2020. But I asked her about the visitors today, and she said about 700 unique visitors per week is what the guide has today. So then you get a picture about how many people that uses the guide approximately. All right, thank you. And now it's time for questions.